Thirdly, he says, well, perhaps the universe is part of a hyper-universe and we're just a bubble within it. I assume he's referring here to vacuum fluctuation models of the universe, and I want to suggest that these were abandoned in the 1970s because in these models there is a non-zero probability that a universe would come to exist at every point in the quantum vacuum of hyperspace, and that therefore, given infinite past time, these universes would begin to collide with each other and coalesce into one infinitely old universe, which contradicts observation. So according to Christopher Isham, a quantum cosmologist at the Empirical College of Science and Technology in London, this difficulty, he says, is fairly lethal to vacuum fluctuation models, and he says, therefore, they were jettisoned 20 years ago, and nothing much has been done with them since. So I don't see any way around this argument, really, frankly, from the atheist point of view. You just got to say the universe popped into being out of nothing, which I think takes more faith than to believe in a creator. Secondly, I argued that God makes sense of the complex order in the universe. He didn't respond to the point except to say you've got to say he makes sense of the particular complex order. What I'm arguing is that God makes sense of the life-permitting initial conditions of the universe. Notice Dr. Drange didn't deny their improbability. He's got to say this just happened by chance, which seems to me to be almost virtually irrational to believe that something like that just popped into existence that way. Third, God makes sense of objective moral values in the world. Here he seems to deny that objective moral values exist, and I would submit that that's simply contrary to our best moral intuitions. As Michael Roos himself admits, the man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Will Dr. Drange get up and actually say that he thinks that the rape and torture of a child is a morally neutral act? I can't believe that he would. As John Healy, the executive director of Amnesty International, has written, he says, I think you share my profound belief that there are some moral absolutes. When it comes to torture, government-sanctioned murder, to disappearances, there are no lesser evils. These are outrages against all of us. But on the atheistic evolutionary scenario, moral values are just the spin-offs of sociobiological evolution. They're not objective. If you agree with me that objective moral values exist, then it follows logically that God exists. Fourth, God makes sense of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Dr. Drange simply responded, well, you assume that the Bible is a historical fact. No, I don't assume this. In every case, I appeal to the consensus of critical scholarship today for the facts of the empty tomb, the resurrection appearances, and the origin of the Christian faith. And I want to emphasize, this is not the conclusion of evangelical or conservative scholars. This is the consensus of the broad mainstream of New Testament critics. Any responsible historian dealing with the life of Jesus has to deal with those three established facts, and I can't think of any better explanation for them than the fact of the resurrection. Finally, God can be immediately known and experienced. The problem with atheist experiences is that we have defeaters of those experiences. We've seen that there aren't any good reasons to think atheism is true. But in the absence of any reason to think theism is false, I don't see why I should deny my immediate experience of God. It seems to me to give perfectly rational grounds for me to believe that my experience is veridical and that God exists.
Dr. Craig questions the inference from step 1 to step 2 in the argument from evil. This is a probabilistic inference. Notice step 2 begins, hence probably. So it's not supposed to be a logically valid inference, simply a strong inductive argument. I use the analogy of the father who is away from his family. We reason that probably, since he loves his family and he has all this power and wealth, if he were aware or if he were alive, then he would have done something to help them. And this seems to me to be a reasonable inductive argument. And the argument that I have here, the argument from evil, is perfectly analogous to that. I don't think that Dr. Craig answered my question specifically as to why God permits so many children in the world to suffer and die. he talks about freely believing. I don't really understand that. It seems to me that you believe in accord with the evidence, and you don't just choose your beliefs as by an act of will. I think God can make people aware of the truth of the gospel message. He seems to question that. First of all, in order for people to freely love God, which is presumably what God wants, their love and some kind of reciprocation from them, they must first believe that God exists. They must be in that situation. So my question is, why doesn't God at least place everybody in the world in the situation of being totally aware of his existence and the existence of an afterlife, and then, at that point, they can make their choice whether to love God or not, whether to accept Jesus or not. As long as they're not in the situation of being aware of God's existence, they're not even in a position where they could make a sensible choice about such matters. I think God must want people to believe in his existence because he wants their love, he wants reciprocation from them, and because he loves them and wants them to be aware of the truth, he wants them to gain the comfort of knowing that he exists and that there is an afterlife, because this would benefit them. There's also the point about salvation. It seems to me that this is something that Dr. Craig should address. Is it really true that people who do not believe in God are going to be eternally damned? It seems to me if that is true, then that would be another very, very powerful reason for God to want people to be aware of his existence, because surely he doesn't want them to be eternally damned. So I would pose this as another question for Dr. Craig. Is it true that all those who have heard of Christianity, say, but have not accepted it, maybe because they didn't get adequate evidence for it, all those people are eternally damned? I would like to know that. Now, on the matter of his arguments, I didn't really get into them. I ran out of time. As for God being a timeless, changeless person, it seems to me that still, for all he says, is very obscure and hard to understand. And it seems to me to be contrary to the biblical concept of God. The biblical concept certainly is of a God who changes his mind and acts in time or within time. Genesis 6:6 says that God regretted having created humans. And in Exodus 32, God told Moses he planned to kill a group of Israelites, but Moses pleaded for them. And it reads, "And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people." In 1 Samuel, God regretted having made Saul king over Israel. In 2 Kings, God conveyed the message that Hezekiah was about to die. But Isaiah prayed for Hezekiah, and as a result, God added 15 more years to his life. In the book of Jonah, God saw that the people of Nineveh had genuinely repented, and as a consequence, he changed his mind about destroying them. So the biblical God certainly changes his mind about things, performs actions within time, so that isn't a timeless, changeless being. I don't see that the God that he's defending here, this timeless being who was supposed to be somehow the cause of the universe and the cause of time in some way, that's the God of Christian theism. It seems to be too abstract and remote for that. And as for God causing time, I don't understand what it is to cause time. When you think of what cause means, to say X causes Y means X was there before Y. The cause has to precede the effect. The effect must come after the cause. So it's impossible for time to have a cause. That is, if time began, which he seems to think it did, it could not have had a cause in anything like the ordinary sense.